Hey everyone, welcome to this Econ 101 session on the Nine Innings podcast. And today we're going to be talking about, yes, you guessed it, data centers, who's really benefiting from them. Again, I'd like to have this conversation because again, I'd stay out of the politics side. I just want to go to the straight to the financial side of things. So let's talk about something most people never see, rarely think about, but increasingly pay for. And this is something that we're all dealing with right now, which is data centers. Every time you stream on a Netflix, or maybe you're using Google Maps, or you're in the cloud somewhere, and I don't know where the cloud actually is, but cloud, social media, or even ask ChatGPT or Anthropic a question, you're relying on a data center somewhere. These facilities have become the backbone of our digital economy. And thanks to artificial intelligence, demand for them is exploding. Cities across the country are competing for these data centers because they want this attraction. They want the taxing. They want what it provides. And they're giving tax incentives, economic development packages worth millions of taxpayer dollars. The promise is straightforward. Hey, we're going to give you jobs. We're going to invest in your community. We're going to have economic growth. But residents in many of these communities are starting to ask questions. You're starting to see a lot of kickback, a lot of angry individuals, especially in middle America, because a lot of these are being put in middle America. So, who is actually benefiting? Today, we're going to discuss what data centers are, why they're being built at such a rapid pace, how they impact local communities, and whether they're creating the jobs they promise, and why some residents are beginning to balk. So, without further ado, come on in. So let's really get to the crux of this. What actually is a data center at its most basic level? I'm sure that you know what it is at this by this time. I'm sure you're probably hearing the humming outside of your room, outside of your house if you're in one of these areas, and it's not a beautiful thing. At the most basic level, a data center is a giant warehouse filled with computer servers. That's it. Computer servers. Those servers store information, process data, and power much of the internet we use every single day. Think of them as the digital infrastructure behind modern life. When you send an email, watch YouTube video, check your bank account online, or use artificial intelligence, that information is traveling through data centers. Historically, these facilities were important but relatively invisible. Then AI arrived. Well, some version of AI. I'd like to consider it less artificial and less intelligent. It's just a scraping of the internet that's already having. I don't want to go on that rabbit hole, but anyways, artificial intelligence requires more enormous computing power. Training and running AI models demands thousands of high performance chips operating around the clock. That means larger buildings, more servers, more cooling systems, more electricity, and yes, more of that precious resource we call water. The result really is twofold. It's a race for technology to build bigger and bigger facilities, often in communities that may not fully understand what comes with them, often in communities that are quote unquote less affluent. It's important to understand where these things are being placed, but we'll get to that here in a second. So here's the economic sales pitch. I think it's beautiful when they come to your community and say, hey, we're going to do all these different things. A data center is going to approach a community with a pitch that sounds incredibly attractive. Company promises investment, construction jobs, economic development, new tax revenue. And sometimes the numbers are staggering. A single facility may represent hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars of investment. Doing constructions, many of those benefits are real. It takes you got to build the actual building, build pathways, build waterways, all these different things. There is a huge benefit. Local contractors get work. Hotels see more guests. Restaurants become busier. Construction workers earn paychecks. The challenge comes after the ribbon cutting. Unlike factories, distribution centers, and hospitals and manufacturing facilities, data centers typically require very few permanent workers once they become operational. A facility costing hundreds of millions of dollars may ultimately employ only a dozen of people at full time. That's where one of the major debates began, is in the jobs question. Many communities approved data center projects expecting a wave of long-term employment opportunities, but modern data centers are highly automated. The servers don't need lunch breaks. The cooling systems don't need shift changes. The software monitors itself. As a result, the permanent workforce is often much smaller than residents expect. To be clear, these jobs are generally good jobs. They're often well paying technical positions. The issue isn't quality, the issue is quantity. When communities hear about billion-dollar investments, they often envision thousands of permanent jobs. The reality can be dramatically different. That disconnect is causing a lot of people, especially in our neighborhoods here in Texas, to reevaluate whether the economic return matches the incentives being offered. Outside of just the jobs, I think the most important thing is our natural resources. Let's just start with the electricity question. This may be one of the single biggest issues surrounding data centers, in my opinion. They consume an enormous amount of power. In some regions, a single data center can use as much electricity as tens of thousands of homes, small cities. As AI expands, those numbers continue to grow. Utilities must respond by building new transmission lines, additional substations, expanded generation capacity, new grid infrastructure. All of those cost money. But here's where the argument comes into play, because people are going to argue that data centers pay their share through utility agreements and infrastructure investments. That's what their supporters are going to say. People like me are going to say that ratepayers ultimately absorb part of those costs through higher electric bills over time. The reality likely depends on the region and specific agreements involved, but the one thing is clear: the demand being created by AI is unlike anything utilities have ever experienced. And somebody eventually pays for the infrastructure required to support it. And that somebody is likely going to be the ratepayers, or us, the end individual. Next, we go to the water question. I think the water question is very powerful because, hey, we need water to survive. I know Bezos came on, I think he was in New Delhi or somewhere, and he said something that was controversial. I'm not going to repeat it. But water basically is the elixir of life. Computers create heat, lots of heat. The heat has to be removed to prevent equipment from overheating. Many facilities rely on water-based cooling systems to accomplish that task. Depending on the design, location, large data centers can consume millions of gallons of water every month. In areas where water is plentiful, that may generate not much of a controversy. In drought-prone regions, especially here in Texas, where they tell us to conserve water during the summers, it's a completely different conversation. Should scarce resources be used to cool servers? That's the question I have for everybody. What happens during drought restrictions? Who gets priority when resources become limited? These aren't easy answers, but they're becoming increasingly common debates in communities experiencing rapid data center growth. I see it. I live in the region where we're becoming the number one data center growth engine in America, soon to be the number one data center growth center, I suppose, in the world. On an infrastructure that has been prone to have issues when it gets too cold, or prone to have issues when it gets too hot. On an infrastructure where water in some towns has run dry, right? Has run dry. It's very interesting how this is happening so quickly in a state so vast and so big as ours. But again, I don't want to get off topic here. So I'm going to go to the tax incentives outside of just the water question because the water question is huge, but the tax incentives are much larger. Um, I've seen so many deals where they get huge tax incentives and abatements. It's very controversial. Many communities offer significant incentives to attract these projects. They can include property tax abatements, sales tax exemptions, infrastructure subsidies, utility incentives, economic development grants. I argue with this all the time. Battle. Without incentives, these projects may go elsewhere. States compete against one another, and communities want the investment. The counter argument is very simple. If a project is truly beneficial, why does it require tax subsidies? Critics argue that local governments are sometimes giving away future tax revenue in exchange for benefits that may never fully materialize. The supporters respond that the long term economic impact justifies the incentives. The answer isn't always black and white. Some projects may absolutely benefit their communities, others may not. The key to understanding what is being given up is what is being received in return because incentives aren't free. Someone eventually bears the cost. So, why are so many communities pushing back? Across the country, residents are being vocal. And the reason why a lot of communities are pushing back is because they've seen the results. They're hearing that, oh my God, these people hear this humming sound 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Oh my God, what happens to property values? Oh my God, what happens to our water? Oh my God, what happens to our electricity? Oh my, there's so many things that have been popping up lately. It's easily understood why people get upset. Across the country, like I said, residents becoming more vocal. They're attending city council meetings. They're demanding environmental studies. They're asking greater transparency around tax incentives and utility agreements. Some communities have pushed for water use restrictions, zoning limitations, community benefit agreements, greater tax contributions, additional environmental protections. Importantly, most of these residents aren't anti technology. They're not trying to stop innovation. They're simply asking whether the cost and benefits are being distributed fairly. And that's a reasonable question. So today, in conclusion, but before I go to that conclusion, I'm going to give you my 2 cents. I like to give you my opinions at the end of these things because I think it's valuable. My question remains and still remains if AI is truly so powerful and it can do all of these things, then why have they not prompted this AI technology? And tell me if I'm wrong. To solve its own water and electricity usage, to minimize the overall cost. They can say, okay, hey, I want you to figure this out, Mr. AI, Mr. and Mrs. AI. If you're so powerful, if this Mythos technology or whatever we have is so powerful, I want you to figure this out. And you to tell us how to maximize the efficiency. And apparently it has not done that, or they haven't asked it to do it. So that's the curious part for me. If it is so powerful, how have we not already answered these questions? But in conclusion, data centers aren't going away. In fact, artificial intelligence, cloud, digital services continue to expand, and they may become one of the fastest growing industries in America over the next decade. The challenge isn't whether we need to do away with them. The challenge isn't even whether we need them, because we do. The challenge is making sure that the economic benefit being promised actually outweigh the cost being imposed on local communities. That means asking hard questions about tax incentives, water consumption, electricity demand, infrastructure spending, and whether those jobs being created match the expectations that were sold to the residents. The facts are simple. Data centers create economic activity. The feelings come when communities are promised jobs and prosperity, but end up dealing with higher resource consumption and tax incentives that may not deliver the expected return. The question isn't whether we need data centers. The question is whether local communities are getting a fair deal. That is this Econ 101 session. That is my response. Thank you guys for listening. Subscribe to the 980 podcast station. Again, I'm Kevin Thompson. This has been Econ 101. Stay home, stay safe. I'll see you next time.